I would like to welcome Dr. Soumini Raja, Associate Professor and Head of the Department at Avani Institute of Design, to kindly take over by moderating the session titled Living and Working Realities of Domesticity. Over to you, Soumini.
Thank you, Tushara. Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, Quickly on Avani Annual Research Symposium 2021, as Tushara said, titled Normal Ecologies of Adaptation, is currently in the second year, and we have envisioned Avani Annual Research Symposium as a platform to conduct critically engaging, honest, and fearless inquiries, and to provide opportunities to develop original research in contemporary issues of design and built environment, with the potential to be translated into a form of scholarship of global relevance. And I'm very delighted to moderate the very first session on living and working realities of domesticity. And I welcome Professor Neelkanth Chhaya and architect Zameer Basrai to Avani. Just to give you a very quick understanding of this particular theme, the public and the private have constantly been in a state of flux, often negotiating with the self and the city. The urban environmental fragilities have expanded and contracted the elastic nature of our self and space. Collapse of the public, contraction of the domestic space, and the altering nature of work, powered by technology and the World Wide Web, have all generated intrusions into that which we call the domestic. During the pandemic, we experienced workspace windows open into our bedrooms, board meetings and classrooms situated on our kitchen counters. We loitered into our balconies and ate with our neighbors as they transformed into the public. We saw too much of ourselves on the screen, more than what our mirrors ever reflected, and we are currently doing so right this very moment. What is normal in the domestic? What do pauses mean to the human body and its elastic perimeters? What are the realities of domesticity in fickle environment? How do we negotiate, appropriate, and occupy spaces normally? So it is with great pleasure I would like to introduce Professor Chhaya. He needs no special mention in this crowd, but Professor Chhaya has been an academic and practicing architect for nearly 40 years. He taught for 26 years at CEPT University, Ahmedabad, from where he retired as a Dean of the Faculty of Architecture in 2013. Subsequently, he has been an adjunct faculty at Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology, Bangalore. Over the last few years, he has coordinated the Gandhi Heritage Sites Documentation Project, and his architectural practice is focused on culturally and environmentally appropriate design and has emphasized innovative applications of local skills and materials. Professor Chhaya, welcome to this gathering. Architect Zameer Basrai is a co-founder of the Busride Design Studio. He has degrees from CEPT Ahmedabad, India, and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, USA. And he teaches architectural design at Krivya, Mumbai. The Busride is an independent design studio specializing in the design and creation of built environment, both temporary and permanent. Led by Ayaz and Zameer Basrai, the studio is a small team of architects and industrial designers who work in a multidisciplinary environment across micro to macro scales. Apart from design, the studio has diverse research interests in heritage conservation, Islamic architecture, and urban futures. And they work from Mumbai and Goa. So it's a great pleasure to have you both, and a very welcome to all of you here. And now I request Professor Chhaya to open the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soumini. And it's really nice to be with all these friends. I can see from the names that we all know each other quite well. And so it's like being in a group of friends at a party. So that's very nice. When Soumini sent me the title, The Realities of Domesticity, set me thinking, and her description of the home as a kind of prison in the last few minutes reinforced certain senses of the home that were bothering me when we talk about domesticity. Most of the time, the domestic is opposed to the public, and the division of the self into a private self and a public mask is complete in most cases. In the last 2 years, we have kept the mask only for the screen. And in real life, the mask could be dropped. And that has led to some quite horrible situations at times within the home. So what is this domestic is my first question. We look at the word domus in Latin, and the domus was the house of a well-to-do person, probably a patrician person who had a farm outside the city, and slaves were working on the farm, and all he had to do, and it's always he, what he had to do was to hold the family together in the city and continue the line. So the words associated with the domus are familia and pater familias. Now, pater familia is very important because it was the family and the lineage of the family always in that period or in that culture was through the male line. And the other members who lived in the domus were somehow subservient to this patriarch. And this continues in many ways to define the domus and also to define the res publica, that is the public space, is also formed as the counter image of the patriarchal home and the patriarchal state, as the politics of being in the arena of power. So that's very, very disturbing about domus. A lineage, which means property, and private property is the basis of the domus, means customary behavior, which means rules according to gender, according to age, according to generational roles, and it means identity. All of these three are today in contestation. The question of unjust distribution of property, the question of unjust customary behaviors, and the question of identity as a force for confrontation. These three all originate in the domus res publica subdivision of the division of the self into the private self and the external mask. Important to remember that the domus was the house of the patrician. The helot, or the worker, the artisan in Rome had work and house both together. The patrician never did much work. There were people working for him. And the house was the place of no work. And if you don't do work, you have the agency to participate in the politics of the city. You can go to the forum if you're not a worker. You cannot go to the forum if you are a worker. But the artisan was a worker and had no rights to be in the forum. And this is a very interesting division. It's not a division which is not reflected in other cultures. I use the Roman because the word domus came from there. But there are shades of difference. In Africa, for example, with the smaller scale organization of society, each individual had what we today call a house. Or we call it a hut, really. We don't even call it a house. And when that person died, the house was allowed to return back to the soil with the death of the individual. So the family was a loose grouping. Similarly, in the nomadic tribes of Kutch and so on. So there are differences. But in the Indian case, if you take the mohalla is named by the kind of work that is done. Each mohalla is known by the kind of work for which it is famous. And every family in the mohalla, or at least the head of every family in the mohalla, has political agency through the guild. So it's different from the Roman model, where only the patrician could have agency. But if we go to, let's say, the Tarawards or the Illams, they still have that patrician division of work. And so the division of work and domesticity is, I think, one of the very, very important markers of two different kinds of politics, two different kinds of sense of power, etc., that could be held. And in turn, that affects the form of the house as an interiorized domain. Every Englishman's home is his castle, as they say. And so it is that space in which he can do anything with any of the family members. And we have seen during the coronavirus time increase in the domestic violence. We have seen an increase in the misbehavior. So all of these, I think the idea of the home as the secure domain of a lineage is something which itself is being called into question by today's experiences. And in that sense, I think that the screen is a very good thing, that it is allowing us, all of us faces, to be, and I wish we could actually take off the masks and be whatever we are on screen, which it is possible to do very differently from in the domus. Because since you are in somebody's house, then the politeness requires you to follow the norms of that house. So it's a very interesting new kind of space which is evolving, which I think we have to make as much use of as possible. And architecturally, where does that go? Where the home is not a container anymore, but the home is something of a... that leads me to the next thing. What is the home then? What is the place which is not the container? It is not the container of tensions inside. What is then the home? And I think it's very interesting that the Maldaris of Kutch, when they are on the move, the animals lead the way. The animals lead the way, and not them. And the animals are moving, and when evening falls, they come to a place where there might be some water, maybe a tree or two, maybe a little bit of forage for the animals. And they rest for the night. In Gujarati, such a place is called Padav. Padav. Padav means a place where you fall for rest. Yeah. But in Urdu, it might be Mukam, the camp. And this sense of the pause in the journey is something which is extremely interesting. Is the home a final and complete enclosure, or is it the act of pausing? And if we define the home as the act of pausing, then we have got a different parameter altogether. And I suggest that there is much to learn from the musicians, for example. In North Indian classical music, they say jaga. When they reach a point where they can see some potential for new work, they call it a jaga. Is jaga pe? And that jaga, I looked up the Urdu meanings of that word, and it's quite fascinating. It means a situation. The similar words are surat, that means face, halat, that is state of existence. It could mean bearings, direction, footing, latitude, locality, location, locus, longitude, position, post, seat, setting, site, spot, stage, station, where and whereabouts. Wonderful. This is what the Urdu language has seen the pause to be. That the pause is really the beginning point of a way of finding a new life. And it is the mukam from where you start the new things. But you always have to have a mukam. So I think that the idea of the pause is the essential idea in what Soumini talked about. And the pause as life, not as a enclosure with lines, which is what a plan is, and we architects tend to talk like that, but as a bundle of lines, as an entanglement of lines, of many lives passing through, and that becomes a home. And it is about moving as much as it is about pausing. It is not about fixing identities, which the enclosure is. It is not about ownership or rootedness or fixity. I will finally end with a quotation from Tim Ingold in Being Alive. He says, "My contention is that lives are led not inside places, but through, around, to and from them, from and to places elsewhere. I use the term wayfaring to describe the embodied experience of this perambulatory movement. It is as wayfarers, then, that human beings inhabit the earth." So it's not a disconnect, but we are wayfarers. He says further, a house, for example, is a place where the lines of its residents are tightly knotted together. But these lines are no more contained within the house than are threads contained within a knot. Rather, they trail beyond it, only to become caught up with other lines in other places, as are threads in other knots. So this is a new conception which allows us to put away the word domus, and which allows us to put away the anxieties of domesticity. And the wayfarer mind, the wayfarer heart, gives us hope even when we are confined to a locus or a location, remember it is a mukam and it is a padao. It is not a container in which you are imprisoned. And I think that is where the whole of these 2 years lose the edge of deadening us, of making us lose hope. And I think so many with that, we could move into new territories of understanding the place of, of finding a rest, finding a pause. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chhaya. I don't know, if we can do that, switch on our mic and loud applause. Thank you so much for this perspective, Professor Chhaya. The idea of wayfarers is something that would give us a new window to look back into our spaces that we inhabit. And I think this is also a great segue to start with Zameer's proposition on the idea of home, idea of domesticity, and what Zameer, please.
Thank you, Soumini. Thank you, Avani, for inviting me, and thank you, Professor Chhaya, for providing all the all such lucid thoughts on domesticity. It's actually it's so exciting to present my drawings now.
Yeah, Sameer, one second. We need, you will be presenting, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I'll be actually presenting some drawings that I've made over the last 1.5 years. And I've kind of pulled out the ones that are relevant to the idea of live and work. And Mithun, could you minimize that window as well? Thank you. Yeah, so the presentation is kind of, it's called Domestica Elastica. I think it's broadly responsive to the theme that we're looking at. And really also to say that, when I read the brief actually and kind of thought about the normal, this normal is so, it's just not satisfied. It's just not something that you can be satisfied with. If normal was what we had before the pandemic, it definitely can't be something to return to. Hopefully the pandemic has had, has created an abnormal that is now hopefully a permanent, kind of contestation, and that we can continue on from here, not look back at what might have created some of the most substandard situations, subhuman housing, for example, some of the most kind of standardized and rigid housing, even for the affluent. So really, I think it's not a normal to return to. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spend some time on this drawing. I've also spent some time thinking about this drawing and doing some very, very, very kind of horrible interpretations, and rejected ones, which I've really not liked. I think this is one that, I feel, says something. I was trying to draw the foam that Peter Sloterdijk, the German philosopher, kind of talks about, with the, breakdown of the grand narratives of the world, and how now we are looking at a kind of a polycosmology, and that there are many worlds now that inhabit. We kind of inhabit, and that they are. A very interesting one was an inter-ignorant systems. So they are actually worlds that once you occupy, you do not look. You feel that they are complete. They are complete in their own kind of formation, and it's a very interesting idea. But the foam metaphor is very difficult to draw, and it is something you have to model, and you have to kind of use a slight, I think maybe a multi-sensorial media. So it's been maybe a little frustrating to kind of draw the form. And I think even Peter Sloterdijk, when he kind of writes about the form and visualizes it and makes it a physical space, I think it is limiting. Oh, I shouldn't be saying stuff like this, but I mean, why not? I mean, now it's my lecture. So I feel that each of them, I think, have a viewpoint, and each of these worlds create a center, basically its own center. Now, why I draw a tunnel is that I think we are on a third level tunnel, looking at a second level tunnel housing a final tunnel, which is really the tunnel that is going to suck us all in, basically. And I think that is, we can see it, in New York today. We can see it in, in the state of, the environment, what is actually happening. People are still in a certain worldview, rejecting that anything like this is even occurring at this point. And that worldview, it has now collapsed. I think we've had a world, kind of changing event right now, the last 1.5 years. And I think whatever it is, those many worlds will have to press against each other and deal with each other, I think, a little bit more committedly. And that you will get a cross view into another world, of this form. I mean, you will look into another sphere, basically, in some way. And so this tunnel is actually that tunnel, and it is a pretty vicious tunnel. It shows you an end. And I think some of these darker spots within this tunnel are your home, which you want to anchor and you want to keep stoic and you want to hold on to things while you're kind of getting sucked out, sucked in. Sorry, and really it is this formation which I feel causes us to think that the home is a place for intimacy, escape, reflection only. And this is obviously, thank you, Professor Chhaya, for providing all the context for the presentation, because this is, it obviously will have that, it has that function, but it always does, provide so much more. And that our imagination right now of home, starts becoming so narrow when you start thinking of only it being something stoic and something to kind of an inward held moment, basically, in this tunnel. Yeah, could we go to the next one, please? Yeah, so this is a medium-sized home. It's mine, and this is a home that was already kind of equipped with mobility. We have a little mobile cabinet, which kind of unfolds, and it can occupy, a person can occupy that cabinet, basically. It's just that much. So it's a small mobile element, and there are a few, fold out elements that come out, a dining table and some storage units, and a composition of chairs, so that you can store chairs inside that little unit. So that was what we had initially. And we've actually seen that space grow immensely in the house. So now each and every family member has been using it for various purposes. So, it's that place which can be partially acoustically isolated. It can be physically isolated as well. And I think that people are literally going in there to get some respite from each other. And also to, I think it's the smallest, most compact space to connect with the world. It's so strange that you go into a cabinet to connect with things that you have never connected with before. And I think that this is, we've left it sometimes at 45 degrees, sometimes at 90 degrees, and it's created all kinds of various situations in our house that have basically allowed us to deal with, the pandemic as such, how to deal with storage, how to deal with, the kid in the house growing up, how to deal with school, all these things. I mean, so it's kind of, already an enabled house in some way for mobility. And it's proven, very kind of potent in that way. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is a drawing when we actually formalized halftime in the studio, and everyone had discovered that they could live and work, and literally live and work 50-50. So you don't need to spend most of your waking hours, woken hours in at work, basically, or rather at a location called work. So that location now has completely been compromised. We are looking at work happening through the day, but so on the right hand side there's a kind of impression of what our studio was. uh, you know I think our only commitment has ever been to having a good time. I don't think we've been committed to anything more than that. So I think that idea of intimacy was so core to our studio that we would you would need to spend that much time together. But halftime has actually opened up a whole new kind of avenue for people at the studio. They've actually been able to come in and out of work while being at home. So the sphere at the left is actually a kind of creation of the studio, but it's really home. And then there is obviously a little you're pulled towards the physical space of the studio every now and then for some amount of work. But then there are lots of times in the day, within half an hour or an hour, that when you can actually go off very far from the idea of work. You are very far away, and then you literally come back. Oh,
Sorry, I'll be just back.
no worries. So I think not really looking at it as a point and a counterpoint, but looking at it as a new formation for the studio itself, and that it's yeah. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this is, I think this kind of a drawing is commonly seen when you're discussing domains, basically within the home, and that this home it's a medium-sized home, and it has seen a very drastic change in domain. I'm talking about a gender domain right now. I'll be very clear, and that basically there is a certain exit from work for the man, and it's almost a kind of a compensation, at home, or what to replace, work exit, basically. So not only the time at work, but also the fact that you're not there, and that has actually created very interesting vacuums in the house due to these overlapping domains, which have actually allowed pigeons to occupy large parts of the house. So nature has actually kind of eaten into this household because of some spaces not being used adequately due to these overlapping kind of domains of people in the house. So so this is just a drawing of that it's just opened up another whole avenue of kind of anyway. So next slide, please. Okay. This is an extremely small house. It kind of barely took care of the requirements of the occupants, and it has actually completely been turned inside out. So this is a house that was primarily kind of occupied by a male, and a male who wasn't working, and this house has now been turned inside out to kind of initially start a little embroidery business, and then eventually to start a dabba system. So to kind of compensate for the income of the house, which kind of got messed up in the pandemic period. I mean, early pandemic period. This house actually opened up to become a complete store room. So the place was actually used for store. There was no, so the beds were made vertical, and I mean, there were kind of two beds in there. They were made vertical and they were used for storage. So they were completely kind of packed up with things in there, and a preparation space which basically left barely any room to sleep. So the sleeping function, which is normally our association of at least home, that you go there to rest, that part also was compromised. So part of the family actually slept in another house because this was happening here. And it wasn't just one person, it was a 2 or 3 households that had kind of, come together and created this expanded version of the space. And there was a lot of outdoor space that was kind of, connected into the interior to accommodate so much, kind of production in this space. Yeah, we can go to the next slide, please. This is an extremely large house, and these are extremely large houses actually, and they during this period have actually created internal buffers within them. So the core family has, in a fort kind of a metaphor, hold themselves up in a very small confined space, and has created layers around it to buffer, the outside in some way. So whatever's coming in goes through many layers of checks and kind of filters, and a lot of modulations going outward as well. So as you kind of leave, there are so many protocols basically as you kind of leave these households. And someone who is kind of extremely used to living in large spaces has suddenly, contracted their imagination of their house to a few rooms only, and kind of created, given away large areas of home to just buffer spaces. So and this, so all 5 are actually big homes. They are all kind of networked, and they create extremely promiscuous core spaces within. So at that level of the core house, they are extremely connected to the other 4 in this way. At that level, there is no buffer. There is literally no buffer. So it's a, I think the 2-dimension doesn't really work. I think it needs to be a 3-dimensional kind of interpretation of how that promiscuous space is found at the core of 5 homes here. Yeah. Could we go to the next slide, please? I think this one we all will be very familiar with. This is the space of the second home, and that a place that is slightly cut away from the city, where you have a place of respite and that a safe space in some way, and that it's quite telling on what you end up taking with you from your city home. I mean, that is, I think, a study by itself. It's something that I really do want to kind of get into. It's something that will tell us a lot about what are some of those things that you literally travel with when you think that you've moved home. And it'll barely be 3 or 4 pieces, which are really those 4 dark spots on the upper diagram. And then and they are the ones that really connect you back to where you've gone, what you've left. And then there is the things that you gain from this new home, the way that your new lifestyle, your new kind of connect to nature, for example, the new systems, or maybe a connect to a kind of rural context, and then that again going back to inform your city home, because that would obviously create this little slight duality in that home. So what you would see as the darker portrayed region is that home which sent a few fragments out to the second home, and then extra fragments got bunched together and then became a kind of an arrangement again back at the core. Yeah, we could go to the next slide, please. This is an unfortunate home. This home is temporary and it's created on construction sites. So for a long time in Mumbai, construction labor was basically living on, I mean, the only way that you could kind of continue work was that labor would be living on the site. So, you know, there would be quarters, entire quarters set up on even the smallest of sites. There would be a room, you know, that would be handed over last. And these would be things that were, you know, I mean, these are people who lived comfortably in the villages with a lovely connect to nature and kind of obviously looking for, you know, better prospects, have kind of moved to this place, and then you're not living in a city home. You're living on the site then. So you have literally the fragments of, you know, the city home. So you've really moved 2 layers down and you're kind of occupying construction site. And it used to feel like a transgression when you would go there. It would be, you know, their living room, their kitchen, and, you know, that's how it was this thing. So I just kind of, it was a drawing that just came up at the time. Yeah, you could go next. So this is a home that was abandoned. It's a city home that was abandoned. There's a person who was who had been put on half-time salary for 1.5 years because the local train could not kind of, so it was a fractured connect basically. The local train is still not kind of functional, so this person still cannot make it. So has basically abandoned home in the city and gone to the village, and is kind of figuring out systems with half a meager salary. So and is trying to you know, still stay connected to this you know, kind of location of employment, even though the space of employment has reached out and tried to you know, a kind of so this little extension part of that core on the right is reaching out to try to you know, connect, but the connection is really not possible, and that half-time situation is still continuing after 1.5 years, which is and it's really someone who is not working at all for 1.5 years on a half salary, still connected to the place of employment, which is you know, it's absurd to some other degree now. This is the thickening of the threshold really at the home. I think this was something that would have this would be something that would be obvious. It would be something that the home had to accommodate because you're trying to create a few extra boundaries to you know, deal with things from outside, people from outside, your meetings, storage, all kinds of transactions. That thickening was anyway happening. This thickening, this particular diagram was drawn for a park which was closed for the longest time, but the road outside was being used as a park, and that the edge basically continuously was used for that. And it seems that at a studio in C, I kind of overheard conversations because my wife was teaching there, so I could hear all the juries. So in a sense, there was also a temple which was providing services at the threshold. So you could do the, at the gate itself, there was a large, like the line used to form on the road with all the social distancing, and you don't enter the temple, but the temple edge has become a new place for for that little transaction, which is very similar to the park actually. And I think the home will definitely not go back to a thin threshold again. I think this threshold will be will have to deal with a lot coming things as they come ahead. Yeah, you can go to the next one. Yeah, and finally, this is a drawing of a new region, and I think this is actually related to that being locked up in a cupboard, but being connected so far with things that you would think are supposed to be physical connection, and the screen basically. So these little 3 moments within that core house opening up and connecting to things sometimes which are as rigid as you. While sometimes it's connecting to things that are extremely fluid and kind of networked. So it really you might be connected in a certain small way, but you see that the connection is possible well beyond in these other networks. So this was actually a drawing about being networked and finding a new region. I don't think we can ever go back to a local or our kind of our little proximity being our region. This region, the more we closed in, the further it went out, basically, the region. Yeah. And this is our psychedelic end to the presentation. I just wanted to read a little note that I'd written. I think hopefully it'll echo what Professor Chhaya actually said, and also what Soumini kind of explained right in the beginning. Hopefully it'll just echo something like that. So it is not something new to observe that the home has permanently stretched, and its immense capacities to accommodate, live and work has been experienced. So everyone has kind of seen this. The home need not be a barricade against the outside world, but a place receptive to external stimuli, a location within a larger, fluid, continuous field. So this is a montage obviously created from the sketches, and I'd like to end here.
Thank you so much, Zameer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is really interesting because where Professor Chhaya ended with Tim Ingold's quote, and somewhere Tim Ingold, if I remember right, he speaks about how line is also, the moment you draw a line, it is also drawing a sense of exclusion. There is also a sense of power in drawing that one line. But on the contrary, Zameer is using the same medium, the lines in different ways to express that idea of inclusion as well as exclusion within these domains that otherwise we see them as different boxes. So this conversation is, I think, very, very important for us to understand the nature of domesticity the way we are familiar with. So what are those familiar ways of looking at a house, a home, is something I think we need to spend some time probably discussing. Because the way we understand home and a house, although both of them are very different, because there is one very interesting exercise that I had come across very recently where one architecture student was explaining the nature of home to that person. And they said that I would be very happy if I can carry my home in my pocket and go wherever I go and then just put it up. And that sort of resonated with what you started with, Professor Chhaya, the idea of communities that are always, on their feet, just moving, like the Malnari community you mentioned about. However, in architectural, industrial practice, professional practice, we often see this idea of home or house being a physical property, something that I own, something that we own. And there is a kind of permanence associated with it. And that the line that you mentioned about, that is very strong, very rigid, not allowing much perforations to happen. So I was thinking if Professor Chhaya, you could come in and sort of reflect on the idea of these windows opening up. Because I remember in one of our conversations, we spoke about Sabarmati Ashram and the way of living there. And what happens when these rigid walls sort of start creating perforations? And here, in a way, there are multiple windows opening into my domestic space, or we are all looking into each other's domestic or workspace in a way. Could you come in and reflect a little bit on this idea of perforations to the thresholds that we otherwise know conventionally?
I think perforations depend on enclosure. Whereas it's so deeply rooted in even in our senses. You name pakka and kacha. You enumerate those who have pakka housing and those who are without housing. You enumerate and you categorize people by that. So it's very deep rooted. The notion that the house is a product is deep rooted. It is connected to the fact that the entire design field is beholden to the market, which needs products to sell, and therefore, in one sense, it's just one whole. So let's put that aside completely. The lines that move across are movements of living creatures. That cupboard that Zameer had and reminded me of my childhood places where I could become small and disappear from the house. And nobody knew, or at least I thought nobody knew I existed, so that I could be in another dream world. So that disappearance, that becoming intangible, was a way of becoming completely connected to the world. And that is something which I think the purpose of I won't call them perforations, the purpose of holes, or the purpose of the spaces between the net. Yeah, let's put it that way. There are threads, and between the threads there are spaces. And I can move through in order that I can be alive. The moment I accept the enclosure, then I have become a thing myself. I've become a dead phenomenon. And I don't want my house to do that. And I think this, we have to move away from the literal application of words like wall or window, because they can be very deceptive. And recent events can show that a lot of, when you say window of opportunity, for example, it's a very, very greedy device. And there are windows of that kind. So I think that being alive means being unconfined, being on the move, but always needing a degree of connectedness to some phenomena. And I think this is something which is which makes us think about architecture itself in a different way. For example, and I'll stop with this last thing. In the viharas, the monks stay in a rock-like cell. It's completely enclosed. You can't get sound in, nothing happens. and yet they're the freest souls if they succeed. If they succeed in that hard, completely ungiving space, but it has to be small, and they have to disappear into that somehow. And I think this is something which is more metaphorical than real. And that, I think, is what makes the home so importantly free of the market. That the market has tried its best to make the home into a product. And mostly architects, we have helped it. But now we are confronted with a different notion of home. The market will try to take that also. And Zameer's sketches are something that will become useful to the market. And we've got to be damn careful about it. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Professor Chhaya. Before I go further, I would request all the participants, if you would wish to raise any questions, please use the chat box. The chat box has been enabled. Thank you. Zameer, it's very interesting to see the kind of drawings that you've developed and how you have started to sort of bring them together into a montage. And that sort of reminded me of some of these indigenous communities, some of the probably the fishermen communities that I work with, or people who live at the edge of water and other fickle environment. This idea of threshold and the liminality of the spaces that you have very interestingly created through your sketches. How do you see, as someone who's also in the field of practicing the industrial practice, how do you see the understanding that you have gained while mapping these houses, or the idea of life within these buildings? How do you see that coming into a different kind of a subverted practice to look at architecture post-pandemic? If we have one like that, if there is a new normal, I don't know. Could you just give us some insights on that?
Sure. I think so. As a studio, we have definitely built a kind of distrust in aesthetic, and we also built a kind of distrust in composition. So I think we've I think we are exiting the visual of architecture, I think. And I think this whole pandemic has confirmed a few things that might have started off in practice in unknowingly. But I think we are, I don't think there are huge realizations, so many. I don't think I'll be talking about that for sure. But I think there is definitely a feeling that we have to look for a program for the house, and that it's a very narrow space, being kind of confined to aesthetic and compositional solutions, and we do see that in practice, and we do get pulled in as well. So it's not that we cannot hold back. We just want to create enough momentum on the other side, so that we go in with a surer footing. It's not that homes are not aesthetic spaces and they are not to be composed, but we go in as a little surer than we were earlier. I do feel with conviction that mobility within the home is important, and it doesn't need to be mobile cabinets and things like that. It's just that if there is a certain possibility that domains are fluid, they can get physical space at least enables enough kind of change within the home. I think that is also an achievement, actually. We sometimes are presented, in interior design practice, we are presented with Maiwan constructed buildings, which are actually all load-bearing walls. So you literally are within a room, um, at all times, and the room defined, for you. So there's very little kind of, area to really create, and we've been basically, fighting in those situations to still make sense of the home, to break out of some of the rigid, things. And this is, of course, kind of apartment interiors. There's so much to unpack in the other ideas of home as well.
Thank you, Sameer. That also actually brings out a very interesting perspective on the programmatic transformation of what we understand as a house, what we experience as a home. Professor Chhaya, how do you reflect on this programmatic transformation that one might have to really deal with as we navigate through this understanding of pandemic a little bit more?
I think the lockable cupboard will have to disappear from our imagination. In the old Ahmedabad houses, there used to be a room called Ordo, and that Ordo was made of thick walls, and every valuable of the house, every heirloom was kept in that room, and you could lock it, and it had thick doors. And that will now go. I think we'll have little bags, and our homes will be dispersing and coming back, dispersing and coming back, and they will be multi-locational. Because I think we go and do things in all kinds of places. We open up our laptops in restaurants, or we do this kind of thing all the time. So that means that the home will no longer be something which is a container, but it will be your life intersecting with another life or lives. And it will be lives which are sort of coming together, and after a while, when they want to do other things, they go somewhere else. And this kind of coming and going will become, and it used to be actually the home, because the memories of making the home remained in the construction of that home, so that it was never a finished thing ever. It was always bringing things and taking them out, and every day you washed it and you cleaned it and you made the alpana on the floor and all of that, and that was every day a home was being made. And I think so what has happened is we want a home which is maintenance free, which is forever, and that is something which I think that only the patrician should have, and we don't want patricians anymore. And therefore, we are going to have a different kind of home. We are going to have, like this, our students carry on a rucksack their entire home. Wherever they go, that rucksack is never taken. They never go without that. It's their home. And I think this is something, new imagination of home, which might become very interesting.
So this is really interesting, because oftentimes one comes across discussions where your client tells you that the house is not finished yet. What are you doing as an architect? And here you are bringing a completely different dimension to it, where this idea of temporal and permanent, and the blurring of lines between these two, and how house or home could be not a finished product, but mostly a collection of experiences. But having said that, I would like to read out what Zameer Basrai has written. This is a question for you, Professor Chhaya. It reads, some homes in antiquity, in brackets even all the way back to prehistoric caves, seem to be able to document and harness deep memory. Current homes seem to further current homes seem to further collective amnesia. How can we create a fun/engaging relationship with our own memories to populate new homes? Professor Chhaya, that's directed to you.
Yeah. The division of labor between one who builds a home and one who makes a home is a division which is an unfortunate one. Also, the division in time between what was the beginning of the home and what is the mature phase of the home, that also is a problem. So, if you look at putting brick upon brick and inserting wood and making, there's a whole set of memories which are coming with that, and that made the container not a container but richly provided with human activity. It was a place where humans had skillfully put things together, or not so skillfully, clumsily. I've been lived in clumsy homes also, and so this was a whatever Ayaz. It was something that had lots of memories ingrained into it. Now, when we go into it, if we can say that I am simply getting a house, then we are not going to have fun with occupying the house. And the whole process of inhabiting the house means that I have to fight with my wife about what to put where, or it means that the children will have to be told, no, you can't keep things there, etc. And out of that conversation will be emerging actually the new shape of the house. And this is the fun part, that you are really rearranging things which had been arranged by someone else without breaking anything, or only very tiny breakings. And I think that is something which can be the fun part, that you accept the what is there. And this I see in apartments all over the country. People find ways of inhabiting. All the families which have a happy relationship do it well. And in flats which are where they tend to spend time away from the home as far as possible, because home life is too difficult. Nothing will happen. It will never be inhabited. So the fun goes out of inhabitation. Yeah.
Professor Chhaya, can I provide a counterpoint to this?
Yes.
I don't know why Ayaz is asking these questions anyway. I mean, so I am basically technologically challenged. I literally, when I change my phone, I purge numbers, everything's gone, start from scratch, first person call, start saving numbers again.
Yes. Same with me.
And I don't know the and I don't understand the anxiety with memories, in the sense that, we have the cloud now, and a large part of memories now are digital. And Ayaz asks for brick and mortar memories.
No, it's not completely true, I think, Zameer. Because we still have bodies. We have not yet become intangible. And the body, you know about this shape remembering metals or alloys, which come back to the same shape. Well, I think in our bodies we have memories, and they are in our tongue and in our ear and in our nose and everywhere, and in so many other places, as you know. So I think that is something which is which requires a physical mirror. The world is the mirror to your body. The body is the mirror to the world. If we say that, then you've got to have both kinds, both the intangible ones as well as the tangible ones. Memories are not intangible, by the way.
Professor Chhaya, that reminds me of an interesting experience where oftentimes when you move from one house where you have stayed for a very long time into another space, the very first few days of a week, you tend to, start switching on the switches which are actually not there, but these are like body memories that you have of the house where you dwell some time back.
Yes.
So if that is what sort of brings together the idea of a home, what then would be the role of an architect? Because as Zameer was mentioning, for someone like who is practicing interior design, what then would be the role of a designer in sort of collecting these memories together, even creating spaces or creating possibilities for memories to sort of collect? How do you see that? Zameer, maybe you could also comment.
Yeah, aren't these things constantly happening and dispersing? Like memories are not like rocks. Memories are more like leaves, and I think that they sprout, and then they fall off also when they are no longer able to produce chlorophyll. And I think this is something which happens, that after a few days even your hand will know that this is not the same house. At night also when you wake up, and so the new memory can always grow, and that's the beauty of that thing, which is both physically present but capable of transformation. And I think this is something which is very subtle. I don't know how much more I can say about it, because I also am as puzzled as you are.
I think there can be some conversation on the context of home. Because as Professor Chhaya kind of talked about that network thing, I mean, that was lovely when, one person's life, it kind of joins another person's life, and that creates maybe another few lives. And it also intersects some, kind of actions. So you have actions together, actions alone. And that if you don't think that the home is the location for everything, it opens up that little part, at least it might open it up to 1 kilometer radius of your home, where your network will actually, so even memories this might not be the location. The location might be a place just around your lane or something like that, because that is where a certain action took place. But it is home. I mean, finally, it is all home, but it's not our understanding of a space that is confined with walls, basically.
Yep. Quite true.
And similarly to another kind of thing of network, that in practice, we've narrowed down the scope of the interior, actually, that what we can do, I mean, how to respond to context, actually. And I think that there's no answer here. It's just that that response to context is something that we need to figure out, basically. I mean, there is so much happening simultaneously right now. It's not possible to isolate yourself within a few walls and say that this is now my context from main door inward. So I think that whole aspect of connecting through even a kind of material language, it is still an open conversation. It's not so close that we just kind of narrow it all down too much.
Thank you, Zameer. I would request Sumitra.
Two more questions.
Yes. Sumitra, maybe you would like to unmute and ask this question, please. Sumitra? Because I think when I read it, it may not.
Hello, it's all right. It's all right, Sumitra. I can read the question. It's so good to see you again after such a long time. Yes. So the question is reflecting on your proposition of Tehrav or Hal in music, along with being a site for pausing. The Tehrav or Hal both are also opportunities to expand and contract, basically play with time. Could you speak to the possibilities, this fluidity in time or temporality with respect to the domestic? I think Sunday is a very good, easy entry into this. You have the week. and the family is busily doing whatever each person does. You know, those lines have shot out and come back and shot out and come back. And Sunday is the day when there is a Chhaya. And Sunday is when you make some very good food. You spend a lot of time together talking about the food and many other things. And I think that Chhaya happens in a home with events, not so much with things, but through events, through what happens in time. And the rhythm of the week, the rhythm of the month, the rhythm of seasons, the rhythm of years, even in places which are now completely urban, rhythms are still operational. And I think, Sumitra, that is where the Chhaya or the Hal comes in. So the rhythmicity of the home in time is something which every family develops in their own way, or every bunch of humans develops in their own way. And though society gives something like Sunday is a holiday to all, but every family develops their own things about birthdays or about certain other things that we remember. Like my sister turned 85, and so we had a call and we talked and talked and talked, and that was a kind of Chhaya. And I think this is something which the house as a physical entity also has. Like, this is where my mother always used to sit, and that chair or that location always brings back the sense of peace that she radiated. And I think these kinds of connections are built into the structure of making the house and the structure of inhabiting the house. Both of these are related to time. So that's the way I would look at it, at least. There must be other equally fascinating ways or more fascinating ways, but the way I would look at it is that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Chhaya, I remember a talk that you had given at Kamla Reja, and you were talking about, when you find Bombay too fast for you.
Yeah.
And you said that it's not fast or slow, it's rhythmic or arrhythmic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
has been, I think that's been a really lovely kind of very useful way of engaging, actually, because we've been kind of thinking about speed a lot at the studio, and that what does the Jugalbandi give versus all the mashups and all the kind of the slightly more jarring combinations. Basically, what does it give as far as speed and versus the more refined and well aged, basically kind of versions of the same thing. And we've been thinking about our rhythmicity ever since, actually, and wanting to be more rhythmic with the city. It would be so lovely to exist like that.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, sometimes even Mumbai, now I think about it little differently from when I spoke then. that it has rhythms which are yet not absorbable for me, for my body. And it's something which it has rhythms. And people who come from Mumbai, they come to Ahmedabad and say, what do you do in this place? What do you do? Nothing is happening. Nothing is happening here. They always say that. So that rhythmic thing from house to house, or from bunch of people to bunch of people, that also will vary. And it is there in our language also. I mean, for example, certain language groups, they start speaking so fast that you can hardly make out what they said. And certain others sort of, so if you go to Saurashtra, તો ત્યાંની ગુજરાતીમાં તો એવો લેકો હોય કે તમે બેઠા બેઠા સાંભળ્યા જ કરો, that kind of thing. that varies from place to place. So it's in every aspect, including sound, this rhythmic thing, and it's in the house also, I think.
I think there is another common question, I think,
Yeah.
this is regarding, again, memories, which Vivek has raised. Whose memory do we populate the home with? Who is our or us? The man of the house, the woman of the house, or the couple together? What moment of their life experience? Or their would-be kids, or their ancestors, or the neighborhood and context, their culture, or the humanity as a whole, the world. So it's a huge question with a lot of question marks.
Yeah.
Or the designers, or the practice, or the philosophy of the practice believe that we believe in. It's an ecology of questions.
Yes. Well, let's try to do something with the question. Everything that has come into existence has a history, has a formative process, so my body is formed in a certain way because I was genetically, I had two people from whom I got the genes, and then I developed certain habits which are mine, and I grew up in certain places which are different, and so on and so forth. And so that whole thing. So for any kind of line which is moving, that means every individual I consider a line, every line that is moving is carrying an entire history of formation, which is trying to find its expression. And when it meets another line, the two lines are trying to sense the histories of formation. And then other lines join in. And the histories of formation become complicated and sometimes result in fights and sometimes in wonderful expressions of love and sometimes. So the house really is somewhere where the various lines of memory or of histories of process are intersecting, and the designer is one more such. I think the designer should consider herself as someone who was found because there was the other line found something interesting that otherwise they would not have appointed her the architect. And that happening itself is indicative of a possible relationship. In our old languages, we call this runanubandh. Run anubandh, which means the ties of previous births and in many previous experiences of even this life, you have become indebted to somebody. And through that, you are tied to them. And that constantly, these lines are trying to pay off the debt. That I meet Zameer and I smile and I say, wow, and then we become so happy that our debt is cleared. I have a debt to him, he has a debt to me, and it's cleared by this simple act. So this kind of, I think, Vivek, this relationship of the histories or memories are not chosen. There isn't somebody who says, this is what we will populate the house with, or these are the people who have the power to populate the house with memories. It is something which is happening as the house is inhabited. And it may take several years from the design through the building to the occupation, biyu mil gaya kind of thing, and then you start living there and inhabiting it. And that may be it takes some time for that to happen. And everybody will be involved. So there can't be any limits there. Even if you try to keep somebody's memories out, sometimes they just barge in. And I have many relatives whose memories I would like to keep out, but I can't because they are connected and they will drop in. They might walk in right now, and I will have to accept them, even though I'm in the middle of this talk. So this kind of thing is there in every life. Yeah, there was one more question, no?
Yeah, I'm just framing that because it's a slightly lengthy one.
Yes.
The idea, this is also to Zameer, if home, let us understand it as a choreography of bodies occupying space, then as you somewhere mentioned about that nature of these spaces and bodies, and especially the bodies of the idea of ability, gender, age, a lot of these things will determine what is the choreography that's going on. And someone who has been working with people, for people, could you reflect on this particular question that's raised by Aika? Is it a more inclusive solution to classify houses in different types? And that's the reason why I brought in the types of bodies as well. Or does using the architectural elements of the house provide a solution? What role does the architect play here? So does these classifications, whether it be the bodies, whether it be the houses, whether what we call as the interior and the exterior, what is the role of an architect in sort of bringing a very different way of looking at this?
Okay.
Zameer, it's yours.
That's a broad one. I read Hermann Hertzberger there. So,
yes.
Yeah, I think if we don't look at the home as a biography, and if we don't look at the home as a set of spaces, then we get the kind of resultant of a set of actions or things you do, activities basically. The mapping of these actions is actually a very interesting starting point, so that we dissolve some of the personality in the space, but we prioritize what it's supposed to do or what people do. And that's only a beginning. It only provides a starting framework, and then it creates a few synergies when you can see that certain actions have a certain affinity. They get clumped together, and certain other activities are maybe solo activities, which then get kind of allocated accordingly. In that sense, there are two ways to enable it. In the Hermann Hertzberger way would be some kind of a polyvalence, that you kind of create things which are open-ended, so that, and they are small things. They are he talks about steps. He talks about kind of a lovely book, basically conversation with students. Beautiful ideas are very clearly and indicated in the work as well. So there are these small things which are always used in multiple ways. So it's not necessary that we need to look at our 60s mobility as flexibility. You can also look at the 60s polyvalence for kind of accommodating more in the space. So the more you accommodate with activities in mind, I think I think you create more open frameworks. So it could be something rigid and unmoving, but just shaped in a way that accommodates so much more. And it could be something extremely mobile and kind of transformative as the day passes, or as the month passes, or as seasonal kind of variations go. And that could accommodate another whole set of life basically in there. So I think maybe that might be my little bit.
Thank you, Zameer. Professor Chhaya, you have another question by Ujjain Bhattacharya.
Before that, can I add something to what
Yes,
Zameer
yes.
said?
Absolutely.
Because I think that's quite interesting what he said. Immediately when I read this question and when I heard Zameer, a sort of image popped up in my mind. Because yesterday I was seeing this movie called Fantastic Fungi, and it's, so there are trees in the forest and they're fixed and they're solid. And there are these things, the funguses, they move amongst the roots and they create this mycelial network underneath the ground. And they come up, the fruit of that is the mushrooms, that comes up like that. So I was thinking that maybe in homes, there are various rates of change or various uh, how would you call it? Various forms of movement. So I was thinking, and then I immediately it went to my actual experiences, and I said, okay, grandmother, she doesn't want to move at all, and she just sits and sits and sits and sits, as they say. And but the kids, they run in and out, and they are in many houses, all across the street. And in several houses, they eat at every single house. Wherever there is some interesting food, they come back, run back, go in, go out. So these two kinds of phenomena are what a house is, for which it needs a kind of armature, which has to give a certain resistance. So I think that instead of cleaning up everything and keeping a space which is completely neutral, it is good to have spaces which provide a certain degree of resistance, which require human beings to do things in order to inhabit them in the manner they feel. And that's why old houses are so interesting to go and live in, because somebody has built that house and some idiotically small space is kept for something, and yet you have to use it, and then you become very, very ingenious and you feel very proud of the fact that you were able to do so. So I think this whole thing about flexibility, that word flexibility, is something which I've always found very mechanical. I rather prefer the ease of inhabitation. And ease comes from the user as much as from the object which is used. And I think this is something which I would like to add. Now coming to Ujjain's question. Yes, which is about we change the use of spaces at times. And this happens in Indian houses roughly 3 or 4 times a year, because your relatives really come in large numbers, and then you have to suddenly, so at puja time, and of course in Bengal, that room where you can't wear shoes and all that. But I think it happens in every culture. For example, the moment there is a death in the house and the body is in state, the behavior changes. You can't go into that room just like you do every day. And so these are not even curated. They are behaviors which happen out of a sense of not knowing what to do. And often a new situation comes up and you say, okay, can I go into that room or should I pass through? Those two are talking and maybe they'll get married in a few days hence, their first time meeting. Should I walk through that room or not? There's a kind of hesitation which leads to the new formation of the room, that the room becomes something which it wasn't before. And I think this is something, Ujjain, I think this is happening in all cultures. In India, of course, it is taken for granted that it will happen. And it is even celebrated that it must happen.
One last discussion probably before we end this session. Professor Chhaya, somewhere you mentioned about home as a space of resistance. And I remember, Zameer, we had that discussion the other day about how your domestic hell sort of transformed, and you have also represented, I guess, in one of your diagrams, how she sort of transformed the space that used to be a space of suppression into a form of resistance to sort of build herself up. And during this pandemic, we have seen that transformation of home into a workspace was also kind of liberating for a lot of people who were otherwise felt suppressed within the four walls. Could you sort of give some insights on why you mapped, what were your understanding of these transformations, and where do you take that from?
Wow. I think as a studio, we have become very conscious of what we do. I think we know where our practice is located, where the scope that we give to projects, and where we. Sorry. I think I'm echoing.
Yeah. Professor Chhaya, I think.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So we are actually and we do kind of provide resistance ourselves to most situations, even actually sometimes to the detriment of the project. So in whatever way we kind of imagine it, I think the way that all the drawings were made were definitely personal. I cannot ascribe it a kind of general value. I think these are my readings from phone conversations, not visits, some video calls, things like that. So these are not visits, and you're not sure. And I would kind of keep the scope of the drawings also, that this is my version of a situation, and of course we are looking for clues to move forward. So you would project things inside it, so that you can kind of excavate as much as possible from what you're drawing and documenting in some way. I think in the particular situation, it was quite interesting, and secretly I was wishing that this change in the house would be a permanent change, where the husband is actually kind of not even coming home at night now. I mean, it's not a great situation, but I mean, it's just that the domain has completely shifted. It's completely a different space. Imagine a home for storage, and then there's another communal home where people are sleeping together. Because of this one small change here, the small things in the next door, kind of property homes have also kind of changed. So it, I haven't documented that yet, but that's again, I think it's a secret wishful thinking that some of these things will be permanent, and that if documented and fossilized in a drawing, then maybe they just kind of become at some point. Then.
Thank you, Zameer. And Professor Chhaya, one last question to you. We have been talking about curating memories, we are talking about creating memories, and even curating behavior inside home. But what if there is no room at all? What if for those people for whom the idea of a home is not even a room? So what about that kind of a discourse in architecture, education, pedagogy? What do you think of it?
By not having a room, you mean having to sleep without not having your own space, something like that?
Probably. There are people who may not have a room to go back to.
Yes. It's terribly unjust situation. But one thing I will say, that humans are quite capable of unimaginable resiliences. Not to sort of justify what society does, but I'll share one or two examples. Once I had asked my students to study those who are living in very tiny spaces. And one of the houses they went to, there was this woman who had a husband who was very bad, a drunkard, and used to take away all the money and not allow. So he had been thrown out. Fortunately, she had found the courage to throw him out. And she was bringing up her daughter in that one room. And the students asked her, is there anything that makes you feel happy? And she took a potted plant which she had kept in one corner of the room. And she said, this thing, I water it every day and I see it grow and it makes me happy. And she had nothing. And so there are ways in which I personally grew up in a one-room house, 5 people sleeping in one room, like a Bombay chawl. And I've lived in Bombay chawls also. And they are terrible places from one point of view, but there are also certain ways in which you find a way of making your own space. Yeah. But those who are without the opportunities for doing this would be really those who are oppressed in such a way that whatever they do, even if they have a house, they have no opportunity for making themselves inhabit. They cannot become inhabitants. And this, in our society, we do this so often to people, that they cannot become inhabitants. They can only become tolerated users. And this we do to those whom we displace. We displace them for various projects. We displace them for all kinds of things. And we say, we'll give you a house. We'll give you a house. And with that, we create the first step towards not becoming an inhabitant, but only becoming a kind of user of a government service. And I think this is somewhere where we have really been unjust in summarily taking away things which we didn't think, you say, oh, it's just he's living in a slum, we'll give him a pakka house. And we say, we have done something good. And that is somewhere where we have misunderstood the sense of inhabitation. So I don't know whether I've answered your question. It's a very tough question. Like all the questions were today. All of them are difficult to answer. And Zameer and I have walked on fire today, on the coals of fire. And so I hope that you'll pardon us for whatever transgressions or ineffective answers that we gave, because this whole thing is too difficult for all of us, including our kids. And I think that is, if that message comes through to all of us, then I'm quite happy.
But this has been such an engaging discussion from Chhaya and Zameer. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And I totally understand that this conversation needs a little more of deliberation, and we need more time. And some of the answers, I'm sure we'll get to it only in a few years' time, probably, or we may never get to it. So, and some of these questions are what has been lingering in the minds for a very long time, with pandemic or without pandemic. So it has been such a pleasure to talk to you and listen to you about the different perspectives in which one can look at home and the idea of living. And I really hope that these windows that we have now open in front of us, we let people into these spaces that we call our own, and sort of share our ideas and thoughts as we move together in this pandemic. So thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for the questions, all of you, and wish you all the very best and stay safe. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.